First, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for giving up some time this evening to hear what I have to say. Tonight's topic will be on designing effective practices. First of all, why this topic? I decided to talk to you all about this because I've been doing a lot of on-site evaluations for the NCCP program and some guest mentoring at various clubs. Okay. And the biggest shortcoming I see whenever I'm doing these evaluations is the issue of, sorry, I'm getting some technical stuff coming back at me from the GoToWebinar, is when I'm doing these evaluations, the biggest shortcoming tends to be in the design of the drills themselves, not in the quality of the feedback or the amount of reps and energy in the practice, but rather just a few small things that really require tweaks. When I made these changes in my own team's training, probably in around the 98, 99, 2000, it had a huge impact on my own team's success. My program was much more successful from around 2000 on until I retired last year than it had been in the previous decade. And I do attribute what I'm going to talk about to that success. It really is small changes for big impact. So before I get into that, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about effective sort of philosophical premises that I base all of this on. I can't seem to get rid of this little thing, but I hope you don't see it. Anyway, so the first one is there's more motivation amongst your athletes to do things if those things are deemed fun rather than work. So we always want to have some sort of enjoyment or competitive piece to what we're doing. And the motivation is always higher if activity is stimulating, varied, challenging, and continuous. So the little short drills of 20 to 30 minutes with lots of variety and everybody being busy are huge. Whoa, no idea what's going on there. Let's see if we can fix that. My apologies. Okay, there's way more transfer efficiency when training reflects the conditions of the game. And that's been proven over and over again. So what I mean by that is whatever you're doing should fit directly into the cycle of actions and have really direct transfer to the actual game scenarios you're trying to improve. Also, athletes tend to retain information much, much better if you take the time to explain to them what you're doing and why. And I've seen coaches literally blow this, but an athlete would say, "Why do you want us to come off the net that way?" And the coach would say, "Because I said so." I really want to encourage all of you to help the athletes understand not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it and how it transfers to the game. We are also building future coaches. So what I'm suggesting is once they know the how-tos, I know how to swing my arm, I know how to put my hands together, I know how to hold my posture for blocking and how to jump and press. Once they know the how-tos, which should be very early in the season and very limited amount of time, then all of the focus of what you're doing should be external. And what I mean by that is they should be thinking about what they're trying to achieve in the game rather than how they're physically trying to achieve it. So I know I want to put the ball to the setter, so I'm going to track the ball and get it to the setter and not really think about whether my thumbs are together or my platform is formed. Those very internal kind of analyses should only be happening in the early acquisition or how-to phase. Another big one. I often see drills that are far too easy for the athletes. And I asked coach, what, they seem to manage that just fine. Why didn't you move forward? And they say, well, I've tried making it a little tougher in the past, but they don't succeed very well. And I don't want to shake their confidence. Well, I truly believe that failure is not the opposite of success, and it is an important step towards success. So what I'm recommending, and what actually is recommended throughout all of the courses, is that you find the balance between challenge and progress and confidence. And so the recipe we like to share is they should be somewhere in the 2/3 or 70% success, and leaving room for 35% failure. And when they get to that 70 or a little better, it is time to add a little bit more difficulty to what you're doing. A few more practical premises. Obviously, more repetitions are better than less, which means the more they're touching the ball, the better. So no room for one behind the other, standing in line, waiting for your turn. Add more tasks along the side. Do whatever you can to keep the repetitions high. We like to call communication and movement the culture skills of volleyball. In other words, we don't do drills just for communication or just for movement, but those should be part of the culture in the sense that they're integrated into every task we do. And they do require reminders, and they do require feedback and praise, and keep reinforcing communication and movement. They are skills that must be trained and integrated. A big shift over the last 5 years, I would say, is around how we train the sport of volleyball. Big turn towards leaving the skills to be trained within the context of the game and no longer training the skills. So we're no longer going to have drills where I'm, quote, working on blocking, just in a general way like that. And I'll get into more of the detail of that in a few minutes. But what we're really looking for in every situation is that you provide visual cues so the athletes can interpret those cues and make the right decision on the action they need to take. So cue reading and decision making being integral to every task we do. Making decisions is also a trained skill. You see from the young ages when someone goes up to tip virtually Statue of Liberty-like with their arm fully extended and no chance of an arm swing, and yet the defender's still sitting back waiting to dig line because they haven't been taught to read a cue, or if they have been taught to read the cue, they haven't linked seeing that arm with the decision to move up. So decision making based on reading cues is crucial to our success. And obviously ball control is essential to our success. Between the decision-making breakdowns and the ball control breakdowns, that's where a large percentage of rallies are terminated. So if we train those efficiently and effectively, we're going to have a much more successful team. So understanding the game concepts and volleyball cycle of action isn't just important for the coach, it's really important for the players as well. So when we draw out the arrows from prepare to attack, they come to understand that, okay, the pass has been made, and now as I prepare to attack, I need to get to my ready position outside the court or whatever position that is in order to be an effective hitter. So same thing with offensive coverage. Once they've made the pass, if they're not part of the offense, they need to be moving into their coverage formation right away. So teaching the cycle of actions and how the transitions are important is pretty critical. So these are all general practical premises, and I'm just laying the groundwork because I'm going to presume that the majority of you on this webinar kind of understand all of that already. Consider warm-up as a valuable part of practice. That means every contact is part of the opportunity to grow your ball control, and it has transferability. So the less you do back and forth things, The more you do triangular things where the source and the target are not the same, where we're cutting the distance and changing the angle of the ball. And also, the sooner we get the net involved in ball control drills, the better. Because when we pepper on one side of the net, athletes tend to not reach effectively. Angle for jigging isn't correct. The more we can put the net into play, the more realistic angles and trajectories and reaches occur, even in the warm-up mode. Okay, now here's where I start to get a little more specific. One of the things that I found doing these visitations is people have very general objectives in their drills. I mentioned, okay, we're going to work on blocking. So that's not very specific, and it's very hard for the athlete to get better at blocking when we just talk about blocking. Is it my load and ready position? Is it my read? Is it my movement? Is it my lining up the hitter? Is it my press? There's all sorts of pieces, and each drill should have very specific objectives. And that way, you're able to give very specific feedback that relates. And you can build that slowly but surely with game transitions. So now we're starting to talk about you're in your initial defensive position, and we're going to move out and pick up a hitter's approach. We're moving this way, and we're going to line it up very specifically another way. So that's what I mean by very specific stated objectives. And again, I'm going to repeat this several times. Reading cues and making decisions are all part of that. So it might be fine early on in your method 2 drills in your early preparation phase to have coaches on a box just hitting brainlessly into hands, but very quickly we need to move to a real set. And what is the set doing? Is it dying inside? Blockers need to learn not to go past the ball. And what is the hitter doing? And as we line up their approach and the angle of their shoulders. So really important to recognize that when you're doing box swings by a coach, you're really not transferring the skill of blocking in its entirety to the athlete. And we really want to get to whole skill training in game-related conditions as early as we possibly can. Another big key, success criteria for each task. I'm sure most of you know all about success criteria and the fact that it can be a quantitative criteria like do 10 and switch. It can also be a qualitative one by do 10 good ones and switch. But there's a lot of reasons for success criteria. The two very distinct purposes. One is so the athlete has an outcome to work to achieve and can feel good about themselves once they've achieved it. But the more important one, or the just as important, is for the coach. Because if you said 10 good ones and 60 reps in, they still don't have 10 good ones, that tells you a lot. Either the task is too challenging, the athlete isn't skilled enough, and it needs to be modified in some fashion, or you need to back up and do a little more acquisition work before you move back to that task. So success criteria is really important. I'll give you an example. I did a visitation just recently, and the coach was working, I'll use blocking again, was working on blocking. And he said, 8 jumps and switch. And he had 2 or 3 athletes that would do 8 and then step out, and someone else would do 8 and then step out, and a third one, and then the first one's back in and does 8 again. So I'm watching, and an athlete in 8 jumps, he gets tooled twice, he's on the net 3 times, he touches a couple balls, sort of getting tooled out of bounds, and maybe gets 1 positive touch, no stuffs, but that's 8. Next. And the same type of thing would happen over and over again. So I talked to him about what did your success criteria achieve? Well, I was just controlling the number of jumps. Well, you can control the volume in a lot of different ways, through time, through number of jumps, all of that. But success criteria should measure success. So I suggested to him, okay, why don't we change it then and say, individually, you need 5 points to get out. I'm going to give you 2 points if you stuff a ball. I'm going to give you 1 point if you're able to successfully reject or deflect the ball off the block. I'm not going to give you any score, positive or negative, if you get tooled, but I am going to take 1 point off if you touch the net to create some accountability. And he said to me afterwards that he was shocked at how much more focused the athletes were, because now they had a specific performance criteria they needed to achieve in order to get out of that task. And the number of net touches in the blocking went down exponentially, because now it was costing them points, which is exactly what happens in a game. So I would encourage you to really look at your success criteria and try to base it on actual success and holding the athletes accountable. So in that exact framework I just gave you, with the 5 to get out, +2, +1, -1, you can still monitor the level of the athlete's efficiency. If they've gone through their 8 jumps 3 times and they're only at 1 point, and other athletes have finished their 5 over and over again, that tells you a lot about the level of blocking for that athlete. And again, it gives you something to fall back on to know, okay, I need to spend more time with Joey on blocking. Another key point in the practical application of your practice plan is to make sure that you're providing both constructive and continuous feedback. And lots of coaches do that a lot. In fact, some coaches talk all the time. But what I'm trying to highlight here is the line, on the primary objective. Athletes can't think about 5 or 6 things all at one time. They can only fix one thing at a time. And it's really important that if you're working on your footwork in blocking, you don't get distracted by what their hands are doing or whether they're looking at the ball for too long or anything else. Get the feet right if that's the objective. This is a huge mistake coaches make. I remember recently doing a performance coach, or the level 3 evaluation. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. Sorry. A performance evaluation, and the coach set up a very good specific drill to work on second step adjustments for the hitter on varying sets. So the set was on purpose, a little inside, a little outside, a little off the net. And the focus of the drill was supposed to be second step adjustments. Perfect. But then they get into the drill, and within 2 or 3 reps, the coach is saying, you need to hit thumb down on that, or reach high on that, or whoa, you're too early there, and giving them all sorts of other things to think about and work on, and losing track of the primary objective. So it takes some really good personal discipline by the coach to make sure you stay on the primary objective. Also, that the success criteria is directly linked to the primary objective. So if I am just working on the footwork, then I have someone standing behind saying, that's a good one, that's 1, that's a good one, that's 2. Nope, that's not a good one. Am I back to 1, or do I stay at 2? That's your choice. But they're measuring only that. When we get into whole skill, then it becomes a little bit different. But you could also say success blocking the ball with good footwork, and put both things on it. It gets a little more challenging for the coach to keep track. But you want to also be progressive in the demands within your practice, both within the task and from the first task to the last task. So that brings me to the concept of loading. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about loading in the sense of mental challenge, not physical challenge. So historically, we have talked about loading in the sense of making it harder, making it faster, adding more weight if it was in the weight room, reducing the work-rest ratio, and that would be changing the physical load. But now I want you to think of load in the sense of complexity. So let me give you an example. In a method 1 drill, I've taught an athlete how to hit line, lots of repetitions, hitting line. I've already taught them how to hit cross court. So now they know how to do both things. So my method 2 drill would then be to put a block in front of that and tell the blocker by signal, controlling the cue as a coach, I would tell the blocker to block line or block cross. So now the athlete is working on the decision about which shot to use based on the block location. Now, how would you load that to make it more complex and still be in a hitter's drill about decisions in the air? Well, an example would be I could put a defender on the line. And now I'm telling the hitter, okay, you can hit cross when the block is line and you hit line when the block is cross. But if the block is cross and you choose to hit line, I want you to be aware of where the defender is. And I'm going to ask the defender to cheat up some of the time and stay back some of the time through a visual cue. So now the hitter has to decide line or cross. And once they decide line, they have to tip if the defender stays back, and they swing away if the defender has come up for tips. So that's a way of loading the complexity. So now in one action, I have 2 decisions to make. Then I would take it a step further and take the position 4 player and say to them, okay, I want you to swing out to the attack line and dig cross, or cheat in to the pot like a slide and get in under the shadow of the block for tips and rolls. So now hitter, along with tip or hit down the line if it's a cross court block. If it's a line block and you're going to go cross court, I want you to swing away if the defender has come in and tip or roll to the inside if the defender has stayed out. Now we're getting pretty complex, but that's exactly the decisions the hitter has to make in the air when they're being effective. So lots of cues. Is he in? Is he out? Is she back? Is she up? And where's the block? And then the hitter has to make decisions. And so making the successful shot based on those cues is how we would measure the success in that situation. So I want you to think about loading as a complexity thing cognitively, how we build the drill. So the first decision obviously is, what's the ball doing? Is it spinning to my right? Should I take a step to my right or not? So just me and the ball. And then it gets loaded to yours or mine and what's the ball doing? And then going on from there, adding cues continuously, adding complexity of decisions. And so that's the application of the new load in terms of complexity. Another common problem I see is you set up a drill. You have it on paper, it looks great. You're going to do exactly what you hope to do, but then it doesn't go the way you hoped, and you need to make adjustments to the task. You need to be prepared to make adjustments, and you might even think about that when you're planning. Okay, if this is going really well, here's how I'll load it. Or if they can't achieve that 70-ish% success, this is the manipulation I'll do to back it up a little bit, to make it simpler. But what you don't want to do is back off on the cues. You may back off on the speed, the distance. You may change the blockers to make it a little bit less challenging if they're having trouble getting out of the task, but you need to be prepared to make adjustments to tasks. It's not a good idea to just do it. And I think athletes will respect you more if you say, folks, just get a drink. I'm not happy with how this is going. I'm going to make some adjustments. And then take a minute or two to reflect and think about how you're going to manipulate the task, or whether you're just going to move on in your practice. So the adjustments may well be due to success. So as I said, having a loading plan. They may also be due to failure, and you need to think about adjustments for that. And it also may be just because some athletes are so much further along in their development than others. So think about how you're going to alter the demands of the task based on the competency level of the athletes. And it could have something to do with success criteria, something that's stuck with me for years now. I remember running a level 2 course before the change to advanced development. And Dan Lewis, the national team libero and current assistant coach, was in the course. And we were talking about success criteria and you know, doing the 20 good passes to get out. And he said to me, yeah, all the coaches do that sort of thing, 20 good passes to get out. But you have to realize that for the left sides, it's only one small part of their job. And so getting 20 takes them quite a while because they're not all that great at passing in a lot of cases. But for me, it's like 50% of my job when people serve me. So I should need 40 or 50 to their 20, and I can probably get it in about the same amount of time. So it stuck with me because I do think there's a really valid point there that success criteria doesn't have to be blank or blanket across all players in all positions. It can be variable based on competency level, or if it's a new player to your team and other people have been with you for 3 years, maybe look at who's serving at them or what the success criteria is. You can also alter the matchups, particularly in serve pass or hit block type scenarios. If a middle hitter, for example, is having trouble scoring and getting out of the drill, you can change who's blocking them. You might want to even take the libero out of 5 and put a middle there who won't be as good a digger. So you just think about the matchups. And if you do have an athlete or two that are fairly dominant, then I think you really have to look at when they're swinging, what is the best possible block I can put in front of them? Or if it's my best passer, who is my best server? I want them serving at my best passer to keep the level of challenge high. Obviously, you don't want your best passer, or sorry, your best server serving at your worst passer, because it's probably not going to produce a good outcome or confidence. So alter the matchups to create the level of success that's reasonable in that 70%-ish space. Okay, so looking at the structure of practice, I'm sure everybody greets their athletes when they come in and talk socially a little bit and so on, but as soon as you're sort of done with that and everybody's ready to go, tell them exactly what you'll be working on today. And those conversations may be something like, okay, folks, today we're going to have a very high intensity, high demand practice. I expect you're going to be very fatigued by the end. The primary focus is going to be our defense, cross court, and transition to attack for our antenna swingers. So that's how specific you want to get. And the drills may vary. You may have 3 or 4 drills in a 2-hour practice, plus your warm-up, but they all have one common theme that involves some digging or some cross-court digging, and you're building it slowly but surely, because you want to be able to set a framework for what they can expect. And you want them to understand that by the end of today's practice, I expect we're going to be better at defending cross-court and taking a swing off that dig, a transition swing. So that would be an example. Warm-ups. I often see teams now with a 2-hour practice, and it takes 7 or 8 minutes to get the net up and all of that. And then they start jogging around the court for warm-up. So I'm just going to suggest, for the sake of time, if you don't have oodles and oodles of it, is organize your warm-up. So it's gradual and progressive. It starts off not too much demand because the athletes are cold, maybe a little light jogging and dribbling a ball, but preferably with a ball and preferably using the skills of the game. So shuttles have become quite popular, things like that. So we go from general to specific fairly quickly, and we keep our dynamic stretch to about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, when you've done your dynamic stretch and you're just going to finish off with a really specific warm-up that probably involves some jumping and some swinging or serving and passing, more full court type stuff, try to include some decisions in that. Don't leave it to just be mindless, because we are also warming up the brain on a volleyball level. Another common flaw is saving a new skill or new tactic to the latter stages of the practice. I'm going to highly recommend that if you're teaching a new play or altering a defense or anything that's fairly new to the athletes, try to do it as early in the practice as you can while the athletes are still fresh. You can refine all the previously learned things and continue to load them from the previous training after that, and then finish with your higher demand, more physically exhausting competitive drills at the end of the practice. And this seems pretty basic and pretty logical, but I'm honestly shocked at how often I do these visitations and that isn't what I get. I often see very high physically demanding competitive drills. The athletes are sucking wind. They're called to get a drink and come on in, and they're still catching their breath in a huddle, and then some new skill or new tactic are going to be introduced. It's not the time. Build your practice in intensity and complexity and save the demanding things to the end. And always, always have some level of cool down and debrief. When you do debrief, make sure you consolidate what was learned and what you're pleased with or not pleased with, and where you intend to put your attention in the next training session. One, the athletes go away having some sense of what they're going to work on next time, but it also shows that you're running your training as part of a plan that has been laid out and you know where you're going next. The most frustrating thing for athletes is when the coach comes in and says, "Okay, folks, what do you want to work on today?" That reflects a lack of preparation, a lack of thought in your plan. Always show that you're on a pathway and that you know what you want to work on next, and that may well be based on what you saw today. Common errors. I try to stick to the ones I've seen the most, and I hope these give you food for thought. The first one, drilling without specific objectives or without objectives that fit in the context of what you're doing or in the time of the season and following the LTAD model. So what I mean by drilling without specific objectives, I hear, okay, the next drill is wash. And I'll ask, what is your objective? And they'll say, my objective is wash. And I'm like, no, wash is how the task you're going to do. But within that, what are you working on? So I really want to stress the need for specific objectives. So you can play wash, you can play 6-on-6, but here's an example. If I've been working on drills to improve my connection with the middle, between the setter and the middle, or if it's more advanced, maybe the middle pipe combination, then we're going to run a wash drill, and you can only earn points by running middle and pipe. It's okay to set other places. Don't force it when it's a bad decision, but you can only earn points that way. Or I'll give you 1 point if you score anywhere else, and I'll give you 2 points if you score in the middle or on the pipe. And similarly, if you want to keep it even, then you say to the defense, if you're able to defend the middle pipe, I'll give you 2 versus defending anywhere else. You can also manipulate your drills to advantage your offense. If you're working on that middle pipe combination, you can do things like it's 18-12 for the defense, and I'm doing this to the offense, and the defense has to score out of defense to get a point, but they're already at 18. So I'm really trying to create a context where doing what we've been practicing, working on that middle or working on that middle pipe combination is like the main thing the setter's thinking about, the main thing the defenders are thinking about defending against. Another common one is the objective doesn't reflect the game demands, or it just needs small tweaking to reflect the game demands. Another example that I saw recently, the serve received to attack on one side of the net, so obviously there's a server on the other side of the net. So the server serves and then waits because there's already a defense there. So the rally gets played out. Then the server goes into the drill in the next sequence, and the person who comes out has to come out, go grab a ball, go to the baseline, and then serve. Well, in the game, the server doesn't get to stand and watch the rally. Obviously, the server has to serve and defend. So if I'm ready and I serve and go right in and defend, the person who's coming out can come out and get the ball and go to the baseline without wasting any time. By the time that rally's over, they're already at the baseline with their ball ready to go, and they serve and defend. So there's an example of making a drill more specifically game related and actually more efficient because our downtime is less. It doesn't change what we're working on. It doesn't change the integrity of the drill. So really think about how you're sequencing your actions to make sure that they reflect the game demands. Pretty straightforward. Success criteria doesn't measure the objective. So if we're working on defense and then they give the points for attacking, that would be the simplest example. And you might think that's ridiculous, but it happens a lot. I can go back to the blocking example when I talk about holding the athletes to a performance standard, the idea of 8 reps and you're done, but they haven't actually performed the skill to satisfaction even once. As soon as you change the criteria and hold them to a performance standard, it makes a huge difference. Another very common error, good job, nice try, all those kinds of pieces of feedback that don't help the athlete. You need to be specific on the objective and try to keep it to that. I like to walk around practice with a pen and paper, and when I see other things that I really want to give feedback on that are not related to the objective, I write them down. And then those become the basis for drills later on where I can inject that feedback or post-practice or post-drill suggestions to athletes in one-on-one conversation. This one is probably my greatest pet peeve. Stoppages, I call them dissertations. When coach calls the athletes in and they talk and they talk and they talk, and you see the athletes literally like crossing their legs or their arms or starting to like clean their fingernails or talk to each other. Try to keep your stoppages to the same kind of stoppages that happen in the sport. So little 30-second and 1-minute interventions. I like to say 20 seconds is plenty because you need to leave them a couple of seconds to talk to each other and potentially get a drink if the stoppage includes that. But try to keep your interventions short, especially when you've started to build some intensity and good flow in the practice. The last thing they want to do is talk. Athletes get better and they learn by doing, so keep it short. Try to use as much cue words based on the references that you used when you were teaching, and keep your interventions short. I've actually seen practices where more than 1/3 of the practice time was spent with the athlete standing still listening to the coach. Oh, it's gone wonky again. Give me a second. Okay. Some big keys. Always make sure you have enough shaggers for a safe environment. And now there's more restrictions and more stipulations because of Rowan's Law. So be aware about the idea of athletes hitting in 2 directions and that sort of thing. If you don't have sufficient ball bins, I've been known to bring some clean garbage bags. Take the garbage bag that's full of garbage out of the bucket that's in the gym or around the gym, put a nice clean bag in it and use the bucket as an extra ball bin. But really important not to have loose balls on the ground or have shaggers place them on the ground beside you. Ball on the hip, I think, is something that we've been teaching and I think most teams are doing, but the extra ball bins is a really good thing, so you can problem solve using garbage buckets. Another thing is the importance of keeping everybody busy. If you are going to have shaggers and feeders, try to change really often, 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum, that they're doing that before they get back in. It doesn't mean that you can't still do 50 reps of something, but do it in 5 intervals of 10 so the shagging task keeps getting taken off, because kids will get disengaged too quickly. Something that has come out in the research and that we're now really pushing in coaching courses is the concept of observational practice. And what we mean by that is as much can be gained tactically and even to some extent physically by watching analytically. So an important piece of engagement in practice is using athletes, and I think you can do this right from the entry level, 13 or 14 years old. It just will require some really specific counsel on what they should be watching. So can you watch for me that her feet are finishing right, left? Okay, that's an example. Or that when she volleys the ball, her hands are higher than her head. So it can be very, very rudimentary like that. But what they're finding now is that an athlete who steps out of the task and has to observe and analyze their peers gets as much benefit from that piece of the exercise as they do from the physical activity. So observational practice can also benefit injured players, and also has some application where video is concerned. You can do observational practice through video. But in the practice gym, if you have more bodies than your space allows, assign observational practice, not only when it doesn't allow. It is a valuable method for practice regardless, and we're encouraging all of you to include observational assignments in the drills. Also a good idea to include some secondary tasks along the side. If you have in any space in your gym near the walls. You can do things with your setters while the others are working on something else. You can take your defenders off to the one side while serving and passing is going on in another place. Always good to have everybody busy as long as the balls are under control, and use extra tasks along the side. I'm always fearful when there's 3 athletes on the court and 1 server and 8 or 9 athletes standing around. I think I've drilled this one home. Okay, so I'm starting to review, and I feel like I've drilled it home well enough that I don't need to repeat myself, but every drill should build on the previous task, both physically and in terms of that cue reading and decision making, so the cognitive recognition of what's happening. And again, the objectives, the success criteria, we're on track when we're doing all those things simultaneously. Okay, so I'm a little ahead of schedule. I was hoping for some questions. I'll check my email in a minute. I don't think I have any, but I'll just say in conclusion, when you go into practice as a coach, you should be thinking that by the end of today's practice, we will be better at X, and try to make it something very specific. Recognition of a free ball and peeling off into our formation. That would be an example, really specific. And so all of your drills include some kind of free ball. The most common silly thing I see, even at level 2, is the coach slapping a ball and having the athletes yell free ball, and then they throw it over. And the problem isn't the moving into formation for a free ball. The problem is the recognition early enough in the game of what the ball location is and what the hitter or passer's body language is, that it's going to be a free ball. So we need to train those cues early on and mix it up with tosses that are hittable, where we don't peel, and then sometimes the toss that isn't so hittable and that they should peel. So make sure that you're better at something and be as specific as you can. Every drill should build from the previous drill. Don't jump all over the place in a practice. If you've done some reception work, then move it into reception to attack. Then move it in reception to attack against a defense. Build and load it from the previous task and keep it as game related to the cycle as you can. We're trying to build intelligent volleyball players, and the more we can continue to build and continue to give cue reading and decision making along with skill execution, the better we'll be. Okay. So those are my big points. And I do want to tell you that when I said there was sort of a turn in the way I trained my teams and the success we started having once I got through like my first 10 or 12 years. I used to do a ton of drills where it was, as an example, you're going to pass and then go out and swing. Blocker, you take cross court. So I want you to swing down the line, and you go in one and you're going to dig down the line. And you have to stay until you beat the defender 5 times. So they got pretty good at that. We could hit down the line, and we got good at defending down the line, and we did really block training like that, where I controlled all the variables, and they went through drills. And it wasn't until I really started to include decisions and variability and randomness and everything we started doing, but randomness with a purpose, randomness with feedback, because the game is random. You never know exactly what's going to happen. And so once I started building intelligent players through decision making and loading the decision making and creating variability and accepting failure, that's when we turned a corner and started winning championships. And so if you can learn anything from my mistakes, hopefully it doesn't take you 10 or 12 years to figure that out. But we really need to be very, very specific, have very measurable criteria, have very driven, narrow feedback, and actually get better at something today than we were yesterday. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to take a moment here and check my email. So the only question I have is, how do you manipulate success criteria when it's in team play? So I'll do my best to answer that. I think I kind of mentioned it when we were talking about the middle pipe situation, but you can do plus minus kind of competitions where somebody has to get up 3 against the other side. And you can put parameters on what shots are allowed to be hit, or for example, I'll give 2 for setter dumps and 2 if you defend a setter dump, and 1 for everything else. You can do whatever you want with success criteria. It can be competitive criteria. It can be measuring the quality of execution individually on each side of the net. I do like the idea of creating advantage and having competitive team play drills where the offense is down about 1/3 to the defense, so something like 18-12, and so the offense has to come back from way behind, and the defense can compete with that. And when we do those, certainly at my level, it almost always ends up either in overtime or a 25-23 type of situation when we start like that. And if the conditions are the same on both sides of the court, compete at 16-16 or 18-18 and run your drills to 25. Using scoring and success criteria that way really ups the motivation of the athletes in the practice. So that's the only question I've received. So I'm just going to say thank you for listening. I guess I talked a little fast because when I rehearsed this, it took me another 5 or 6 minutes, but that's okay. I think I got my key points across, and good luck with your seasons, and I hope you enjoy the next webinar. Bye for now.